Welcome back to episode 11 of Thoughts from the Porch podcast. As we begin this one, because it is episode 11, I think it's a good time to remember I'm in no way a professional podcaster. We don't edit any of these videos, even though most of the most of the former students I have on here always tell me, I can show you how to edit this. We never edit them. All the episodes are thought of, you know, on the back porch. That's why it's called Thoughts from the Porch. And what it's basically turned into is hosting former students who are, I consider, everyday rock stars doing great things that most people never hear about. I'm not in it for views or likes or subscribers, just a retired teacher who enjoys highlighting former students that I taught who just are doing really cool things. Today I'm highlighting one who has never left me and who never stops inspiring me to be better. Her name is Hannah Tate. Notice I did not say, Hannah, welcome to the podcast. Hannah's not physically with me. She's one of 4 students who, while I was teaching, either passed away or got the sickness that took them away while they were in my classroom. Teaching is a hard thing, but the hardest thing ever that I ever did in the classroom was to come back the day after a student, thank goodness only just a few, had passed away, and there's an empty seat in the classroom. Hannah was one of those. But this is not going to be a gloom and doom podcast. I know it started out that way, but Hannah's story, while it did not end physically the way we all wanted it to, the way that she handled her circumstances while she was fighting and being sick, inspires me to this day. If you've heard our podcast before, you know, or if you've been in my classroom before, you know that we end every podcast, every classroom with the words, every class with the words grace and peace. Hannah fought a terrible health situation, always displaying what those 2 words mean as far as living them out. An old preacher once said, this is a quote, "The grace of God is abundant. It is for all lands, for all ages, for all conditions. It seems to undergird everything. Pardon for the worst sin, comfort for the sharpest suffering, the brightest light of the thickest darkness." After her diagnosis, I can honestly say I never saw her lose her peace. She still flashed her smile, still had her sense of humor, and she was still Hannah. She was a model of God's grace. And I haven't said a whole lot about what Hannah was, but she was one of those who lit up every room. Infectious smile, gregarious, outgoing personality, just an unreal kid. There's some things in life I will never understand ever until I get to ask questions later. But, why these kind of things happen, I don't know. But to be honest, I'm not sure how she did it, how she kept that grace and peace. I think back, she would FaceTime our class. I had her in Algebra 2, and she would FaceTime our class from St. Jude's in Memphis and joke with us and show us how awful the food was that she was having to eat during her treatments. That was the best use of cell phones in a classroom I've ever seen in my life. We got to talk to Hannah, joke with Hannah, and she was the one joking with us. And how she was doing that in those moments, I don't know. That's just who she was. When she was home, she would visit when she could. And although I knew there were times of immense struggle for her, she never showed it to me or anybody else as far as I know. She taught me that when I have to deal with something, no matter how big or small, I can also do it with grace and peace. Now, admittedly, I'm not as good at doing that as Hannah was, even to this day. I'm 61. I admire her 16-year-old self and the way that she could do that. In my classroom, if you've ever been in one of my classrooms, Sometime around 2012, 2011, 2012, the News Sentinel came with a little article about how we do things in my classroom, and you know that was an honor. But they also took a picture of my class in action, and the cool thing was Hannah was front and center of that picture. And you know, I kept that article. I laminated it, hung it up on the wall in my classroom. And I'm sure some people would come in my class and like, that's kind of an egotistical thing to do, put a newspaper article about yourself in your classroom. Well, the only reason that newspaper article hung in that classroom, in every classroom I had once I had Hannah, was because of the picture of Hannah. And if you've been in my classroom, I take laps constantly around the room. We do a lot of peer teaching in my classroom, and every time I would take a lap while kids are teaching each other concepts, I would see her picture. And what it kept telling me all the time was, I don't know what you're struggling with today, talking about myself, but it is nothing in comparison to what Hannah went through, and to see how she went through it, and to maintain that grace and the peace, and still being Hannah, and still having that smile, and still just going through it with amazing um, stamina the way she did. I should be able to do anything the same way. And so it just reminded me to engage people with a smile, no matter what's going on with me. It's because it's not all about me, And she, to this day, and now I'm retired. That newspaper article right now is in my man cave, and it's gonna stay there. And as another reminder, every time I go in there now, I see Hannah, and I'm thinking, you know what? I don't know what happened to me today or yesterday. Anything bad? I don't know. But what I saw her deal with is 10 times worse than anything I've ever had to. Um, I'm not the only one that she inspired, but I can't imagine a podcast like this with former students and not having her as a major part, or her being one of them, because she is one. And I try to never forget any of my students. I'm going to be honest with you. I forget names sometimes. I see faces and I'm like, I can tell you where you sat, what kind of students you were, but sometimes I do forget names. But Hannah was one of those where, that you just don't. When I sing about Hannah, I do have a text on my phone that has survived at least 2 or 3 phone changes, and it's dated November 6, 2015. And I'm one of these people who I delete text all the time, sometimes to my detriment. I don't keep a lot of text on my phone. They take up a lot of memory, so I get rid of them. But I have one text. If you scroll through my phone, my text messages on my phone, the very last ones has Hannah Tate, and it says November 6, 2015. And the funny thing is, all it is a text from Hannah when she was back at school. She came to visit. She wasn't in school. She came to visit, and she brought some food in and wanted me to come to the gym to eat some. So the last text says, "Come to the gym for some food." And that's the last text I ever got from her. So that text will never leave my phone. I hope it never does. Again, this podcast, this episode, is not about gloom and doom. And I'm sorry you've had to listen to just me. This podcast is all about honor. And it's about living with grace. It's about living with peace. It's about smiling. It's about being like Hannah. It's about being a positive impact on the people around you, and it's doing it for the right reasons. Be real. Be who God made you to be. And no matter what you're going through, and who knows, but what Hannah taught me is you can do it with grace, and you can do it with a peace that passes any understanding. And that's a great place to leave this episode. So I hope you come back for episode 12 next week. Hopefully be a little lighter. But again, thank you, Hannah. Grace and peace.